Welcome, dear listeners, to this peaceful journey through time and space where together we will explore one of the most misunderstood epochs in human history. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, we will embark on a slow, measured journey to the shores of ancient Scandinavia, where lived the people we call Vikings. Close your eyes and imagine not the bloodthirsty warriors in horned helmets racing across the seas with axes raised as Hollywood shows us. Instead, picture the misty fjords of Norway, where the rising sun slowly breaks through the morning fog, illuminating small wooden houses from whose chimneys smoke rises. Imagine the sound of waves gently lapping against rocky shores, and the quiet voices of people beginning their day with simple but important tasks. This is not a story of glory and conquest. This is a story of real people who lived, worked, loved, and dreamed more than 1,000 years ago. This is a story about how myths and legends can distort our understanding of the past, and how archaeology and historical research help us see the truth behind romantic fabrications. Tonight we will debunk myths created by 19th century operas, Hollywood films, and popular culture. We will learn about the real lives of the people called Vikings, about their daily concerns, their families, their work, and their dreams. We will understand that behind the image of fierce warriors were ordinary people, most of whom never left their native villages and spent their days tilling the soil, tending livestock, and caring for their families. Let this calm narrative carry you into a world where history meets reality, where myths give way to facts, and where you can find peace in understanding how our distant ancestors actually lived. This journey will be slow and measured, like the flow of ancient Scandinavian rivers carrying their waters to the sea through forests and fields where Vikings once lived. Chapter 1. The Myth of Horned Helmets. Let us begin our journey by debunking perhaps the most famous and persistent myth about Vikings. Imagine an opera house in Bayreuth, Germany, 1876. Gas lamps illuminate the richly decorated hall. The audience in evening dress awaits the beginning of a grand spectacle. On stage, the first performance of Richard Wagner's Ring of the Nibelung is about to begin, and costume designer Karl Emil Doppler makes a decision that will forever change our perception of Vikings. Doppler, striving to create an impressive and memorable image, decides to decorate the helmets of actors playing ancient Germanic warriors with curved horns. It seems to him that this looks spectacular and dramatic. He does not know that his creative decision will spawn one of the most enduring historical myths, which will exist for more than a century and a half. Slowly breathe in and out, imagining how this image spreads from the opera house into books, paintings, and then into films and television series. Each new generation of artists and directors copies this image without questioning its historical authenticity. Horned helmets become a symbol of Vikings just as red caps became a symbol of Little Red Riding Hood. But what do archaeological finds tell us? Imagine a quiet laboratory where archaeologists carefully clean ancient artifacts from the earth. Over more than a century of excavations in Scandinavia, many objects from the Viking Age have been found: weapons, jewelry, tools, parts of ships. Among these finds are helmets, but none of them are decorated with horns. The most famous and well-preserved Viking helmet was found in Geirmundbu, Norway. This is a simple, practical iron helmet with protection for the eyes and nose. No horns, no wings, no excessive decorations. This is a warrior's helmet, created for protection in battle, not for theatrical effect. Think about practicality. Imagine yourself in battle where every movement could mean the difference between life and death. Horns on a helmet would not just be useless, they would be dangerous. An opponent could grab a horn and break your neck. Horns would create additional weight, making movement difficult. They could catch on tree branches or ship rigging. Horned helmets did exist in history, but not in the Viking Age. Archaeologists have found them in Bronze Age burials a millennium and a half before the time of the Vikings. These ancient helmets were probably used in religious ceremonies, not in battle. They were status symbols or ritual objects, similar to how bishops today wear mitres and judges wear wigs. Real Vikings wore simple, functional helmets made of iron or leather. Many warriors had no helmets at all, relying on wooden or leather shields for protection. Helmets were expensive items that only wealthy warriors or chiefs could afford. Imagine a real Viking preparing for a campaign. He puts on simple chainmail, if he has it, takes a wooden shield covered with leather, an iron sword or axe, and a simple helmet without any decorations. His appearance is dictated by practicality, not a desire to impress. He knows that in battle, effectiveness matters, not spectacle. This myth of horned helmets shows us how easily romantic notions can replace historical truth. It reminds us of the importance of critical thinking and the need to verify our ideas about the past using archaeological data and historical sources. As you relax and prepare for sleep, remember, true history is often more interesting and instructive than the brightest myths. Real Vikings were people of their time, practical and adapted to the harsh conditions of life in medieval Scandinavia. Chapter 2: Real Daily Life. Now let us slowly transport ourselves to a typical Scandinavian village of the 9th century. Forget images of magnificent halls with feasting warriors. Instead, imagine a small settlement of 5 or 6 wooden houses surrounded by fields and pastures. Smoke rises from chimneys, mixing with the morning mist. This is not a place for heroic deeds, this is a place for survival. Most people we call Vikings never left their native villages. They were not warriors racing across the seas in search of glory and plunder. They were farmers, craftsmen, fishermen. Their lives were centered around a simple but vital task: surviving in the harsh climate of Northern Europe. Imagine a typical day in the life of a Scandinavian family. The sun rises late in the winter months, and the family wakes up in a long wooden house where people and animals live under one roof. This is not romance, this is practicality. The warmth of animals helps heat the house during long cold nights. Women in this society had clearly defined duties. Their world was inside the threshold of the home. They spun wool, wove fabric, sewed clothes for the whole family. Every thread, every stitch was the result of long hours of painstaking work. They prepared food, baked bread, brewed beer, made cheese and butter. They milked cows and sheep, cared for poultry. Men worked beyond the threshold. Their world was fields, forests, sea. They plowed the land with wooden plows that had to be changed every 2 days due to wear. Iron plows would appear only after the Viking Age. They sowed grain, tended crops, harvested. During harvest time, the whole family worked together because every pair of hands was needed for survival. Imagine the process of plowing a field. A wooden plow is pulled by oxen or, if there are none, by slaves. The plow only scratches the surface of the earth, not turning it over like modern plows. Therefore, the field has to be plowed twice, crosswise, to somehow loosen the soil. This is hard, exhausting work in the open air, in any weather. The harvest was a matter of life and death. A bad year meant famine. Archaeological studies of skeletons from that era show signs of frequent malnutrition. People were shorter than we imagine. Their bones bear traces of heavy physical work and disease. Child mortality was terrifyingly high. A third or even half of children died before reaching adulthood. Diseases that are easily treated today were then fatal. A simple infection could kill a healthy adult. A toothache could cause death. Winters were especially hard. Imagine long months when the sun barely shows itself, when food supplies slowly dwindle, when cold penetrates through the walls of a wooden house. People lived in semi-darkness, saving candles and lamp oil. They told stories, repaired tools, planned work for the next year. Most people never traveled farther than the neighboring village. Their world was limited to a few kilometers around home. They knew every tree in their forest, every stone in their field. Their life was connected to the land, to the change of seasons, to the cycles of sowing and harvesting. Even in the largest settlements of that time, no more than 50 families lived. Imagine a village where everyone knows everyone, where every event, birth, death, wedding, concerns the entire community. This was a world of close ties, mutual aid, but also constant social control. Trade existed, but it was limited. Most things used by a family were produced at home or in the village. Iron for tools, salt for preserving meat, some jewelry, these were perhaps all that came from outside. Religion permeated daily life, but this was not the heroic religion of Odin and Thor from the sagas. This was practical religion, connected with the fertility of the earth, protection of the home, success in daily affairs. People prayed for a good harvest, for the health of livestock, for the safety of the family. This was a life full of labor, hardship, and uncertainty. But it was also a life full of meaning, where every day mattered, where every person played an important role in the survival of the community. This was a reality much more complex and human than any Hollywood fantasies about Viking warriors. Chapter 3: The Myth of a United Warrior Nation. As you continue to relax, let us debunk another persistent myth. Hollywood and popular culture often present Vikings as a united nation of fierce warriors, united by a common goal of conquering the world. But reality was much more complex and interesting. Imagine a map of Scandinavia 1,000 years ago. There was no single country called Viking land. Instead, there were 3 different regions with different cultures, languages, traditions, and even different ways of life. Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes were as different as today's French, Germans, and Italians. Let us begin our journey with Denmark. Imagine relatively flat, fertile land perfectly suited for agriculture. Danish land was richer and milder than the lands of their northern neighbors. Here, monarchy formed earlier than elsewhere. More stable political structures appeared. Danish Vikings, thanks to their geographical position, most often made expeditions to Western Europe and the British Isles. Now let us move to Norway. Imagine the harsh land of fjords, mountains, and narrow valleys. A long, jagged coastline where the sea penetrates deep into the land, creating natural harbors. This geography shaped a people of seafarers. Norwegians became great explorers, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Their ships were their homes, the sea their road. Sweden represented yet another world. A milder climate in the south and east, access to the Baltic Sea, and great rivers leading deep into the continent. Swedes, often called Rus, became great traders, penetrating by rivers to Constantinople and Baghdad. They founded trading settlements that later became the cities of Kiev and Novgorod. These differences were not just geographical, they shaped different cultures, different values, different ways of life. A Danish farmer growing grain on fertile plains lived completely differently from a Norwegian fisherman from a fjord or a Swedish trader sailing the rivers of Russia. Even the word Viking did not mean nationality. It was an occupation and activity. Going Viking meant going on a sea voyage for plunder or trade. Most Scandinavians never went Viking. They stayed home, engaged in agriculture, crafts, trade. Imagine a young man from a Norwegian village. He might spend his whole life never leaving his fjord. Or he might join an expedition to Iceland, become a farmer on new land. Or perhaps he would go on a trading journey to England. Each choice leads to a completely different life. The political structure was also fragmented. There was no single Viking king. There were local chiefs, jarls, kings, each controlling a small territory. They could unite for joint campaigns, but more often competed with each other for resources and influence. The closest thing to a unified Viking kingdom was Knut the Great's North Sea Empire in the early 11th century. But even this empire, which united Denmark, Norway, and England, lasted only a few decades and collapsed immediately after Knut's death. Languages, though related, differed. A Dane could not always easily understand a Swede. Religious practices, though based on common mythology, had regional peculiarities. The gods worshipped in Denmark could differ from the gods of Norway or Sweden. Trade connections also differed. Danes traded mainly with Western Europe. Norwegians developed ties with Atlantic islands. Swedes created a trade network stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Even ships, the symbol of the Viking Age, differed by region. Norwegian ships were adapted for sailing in the open ocean. Danish ones for raids along the coast. Swedish ones for river navigation. Imagine a meeting of Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish chiefs. They may understand each other, may have common interests, but they represent different peoples with different traditions and goals. They are united not by nationality, but by common Scandinavian culture and similar challenges of survival in the harsh northern climate. This myth of a united Viking nation shows how modern ideas about nation-states are projected onto the past. In the Viking Age, identity was more local, more connected to a specific place, a specific chief, a specific community. Understanding this diversity makes Viking history much richer and more interesting than any simplified myth of a united warrior people. Chapter 4: Women in Viking Society. Now, as you sink into a state of rest, let us turn to one of the most romanticized aspects of Viking mythology, the role of women in their society. Modern popular culture often depicts Viking women as fierce warriors fighting side by side with men. But what does history tell us about the real lives of Scandinavian women? Imagine a quiet morning in a Scandinavian village. The sun slowly rises over wooden houses, and women begin their day. Their world is clearly defined by tradition and necessity. This is the world inside the threshold, the world of home, family, daily concerns that ensure the survival of the entire community. The life of a Scandinavian woman began early. Girls from childhood learned to spin, weave, cook, care for younger children. By adolescence, they already possessed all the skills necessary for running a household. Marriage was usually concluded at the age of 15 or 16, and from that moment, the woman became responsible for the welfare of her new family. The main duty of a woman was clothing production. Imagine long winter evenings when a woman sits by the hearth, spinning wool by the light of an oil lamp. Every thread passes through her hands. Every meter of fabric is the result of hours of painstaking work. Her skill determines whether the family will be warmly dressed during harsh winter months. Weaving was not just a craft, it was an art. Women created complex patterns, passed traditions from generation to generation. The quality of fabric a woman produced reflected her status in society. Rich fabrics with gold threads were a sign of the family's high position. Food preparation was another vital duty. But this was not just cooking, this was ensuring the family's survival. Women had to know how to preserve meat for winter, how to prepare nutritious dishes from limited ingredients, how to brew beer and make cheese. They managed food supplies, planned meals for long winter months. Dairy farming was also a woman's responsibility. Imagine a woman who gets up before dawn to milk cows and sheep. She knows every animal by name, understands their needs, cares for their health. Milk, butter, cheese, all these are products of her labor, important sources of nutrition for the family. Women also played an important role in the religious life of the community. They were keepers of household altars, conducted rituals related to fertility and home protection. Some women became seers or healers, using knowledge of herbs and ancient rites. But what about female warriors, Valkyries, and shield maidens that the sagas tell us about? These images, though present in literature, rather reflect mythological ideals than historical reality. Archaeological finds of weapons in female burials do not necessarily mean these women were warriors. Weapons could be status symbols, family heirlooms, or ritual objects. This does not mean women were powerless. Scandinavian women had more rights than their contemporaries in other parts of Europe. They could own property, demand divorce, participate in trade. If a husband went on a long journey, the woman became head of the family, made important decisions, managed the household. Imagine a woman whose husband has gone on a trading expedition that may last months or even years. She must manage the farm, make decisions about crops and harvest, resolve disputes, protect the family's interests. This requires strength of character, intelligence, leadership qualities. Some women could indeed participate in expeditions, but usually as settlers, not warriors. When Scandinavians founded new settlements in Iceland or other lands, women were necessary for creating sustainable communities. They brought with them household, management skills, knowledge of agriculture, the ability to create a home in a new land. Motherhood was a central part of female identity, but this was motherhood under conditions of high child mortality. Women bore many children, knowing that many would not survive to adulthood. This required special emotional strength, the ability to love and care despite the constant threat of loss. Older women in the community played the role of wise advisors. They were keepers of traditions, knowledge about treating diseases, about household management. Young women turned to them for advice, learned life wisdom from them. Women were also important participants in economic life. They traded products of their labor, fabrics, dairy products, handicrafts. Some women became successful traders, especially in textile trade. The real life of Scandinavian women was full of labor, responsibility, and challenges. They were not warriors from legends, but real people whose contribution to the survival and prosperity of their communities was invaluable. Their strength was manifested not in battle, but in the daily struggle for life, in caring for family, in preserving traditions and culture. Understanding the real role of women in Viking society gives us a more complete and human picture of this era, where every person, regardless of gender, played an important role in the complex system of survival and prosperity. Chapter 5, Economic Reality. As you continue to sink into a state of rest, let us explore another aspect of Viking life that radically differs from the Hollywood image. Imagine not bloodthirsty pirates, but enterprising traders whose trade networks stretched from Greenland to Constantinople, from Iceland to Baghdad. Imagine a quiet harbor somewhere on the coast of Sweden. Dawn slowly illuminates wooden docks where ships stand loaded not with weapons for raids, but with goods for trade. Amber from the Baltic, furs from northern forests, iron from Scandinavian mines. This was reality for most Scandinavians who went on sea voyages. Trade was the lifeblood of Scandinavian society. The harsh climate and limited resources of Scandinavia made trade not a luxury, but a necessity. Salt for preserving meat, grain for bread in bad years, metals for tools and weapons, all this had to be obtained in exchange for local goods. Scandinavians developed a unique economic system based not on coins, but on the weight and purity of metals. Imagine a trader who carries small scales with him and knows the exact cost of silver and gold. Each transaction requires weighing metal, checking its quality, complex calculations. Silver was the foundation of this economy. Arabic dirhams, Byzantine solidi, Western European denarii, all these coins were valued not as money, but as sources of silver. Traders often cut coins into pieces to get the right weight of metal for a transaction. Archaeologists still find hoards of silver hidden by Vikings. Imagine a trader who buries his wealth before a dangerous journey, hoping to return for it. Some of these hoards contain thousands of coins from different countries, testifying to wide trade connections. Swedish traders, known as Rus, created one of the most impressive trade networks in history. They sailed the rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga, Dnieper, Don, reaching the Caspian and Black Seas. Their journeys were long and dangerous, requiring months of sailing through unknown lands. Imagine such a journey. A ship loaded with furs and amber slowly rises against the river current. Traders must overcome rapids, negotiate with local tribes, defend against robbers. But at the end of the journey, rich markets of Constantinople or Baghdad await them. In Constantinople, Scandinavian traders met merchants from all over the known world. Silk from China, spices from India, precious stones from Persia. They exchanged northern goods for southern riches, creating connections between the most remote corners of Eurasia. Norwegian traders mastered Atlantic routes. They brought grain and timber to Iceland, receiving wool and fish in return. From Iceland, they sailed to Greenland, and from there to the shores of North America. These journeys required incredible courage and navigational skill. Danish traders controlled routes to Western Europe. They traded with England, France, German lands. Their ships carried amber, furs, slaves south, returning with wine, fabrics, silver. But Viking trade had a dark side. Slavery was an integral part of their economy. Prisoners captured in raids became commodities. Slaves worked on farms, in craft workshops, were sold in markets from Dublin to Constantinople. Imagine a slave market in Dublin, one of the largest centers of slave trade in Europe. Here they sold people captured in Ireland, England, Scotland. This was a cruel reality that romantic films about Vikings do not show. Crafts also played an important role in the economy. Scandinavian blacksmiths were famous for the quality of their swords. Jewelers created exquisite ornaments from gold and silver. Shipbuilders built vessels that were the best in the world for their time. Imagine a blacksmith's workshop in a small Scandinavian town. The master works on a sword, folding and reforging metal hundreds of times, creating a blade that will serve for generations. His products are valued from Iceland to Byzantium. Trading cities gradually grew around convenient harbors and trade routes. Hedeby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, Kaupang in Norway. These cities were cosmopolitan centers where traders from different countries met, speaking different languages. In these cities, one could hear Arabic speech, see Byzantine silks, taste Eastern spices. Here lived craftsmen of different nationalities, creating a unique cultural mixture. Women also participated in trade. They sold products of their labor, fabrics, dairy products, jewelry. Some women became successful traders, especially in textile trade. Trade expeditions required complex organization. It was necessary to collect goods, equip a ship, hire a crew, stock provisions for a long journey. These were serious commercial enterprises requiring significant investments and careful planning. The risks were enormous. Ships could sink in a storm, goods could be captured by pirates, traders could die from diseases in distant lands. But profits could be fantastic. A successful trading expedition could make a person rich for life. This trading activity was much more important for Scandinavian society than raids and plunder. It was trade that ensured prosperity, created wealth, supported population growth. It was traders, not warriors, who were the real heroes of the Viking Age. Understanding economic reality helps us see Vikings not as barbarian destroyers, but as enterprising people who created one of the most extensive trade networks of the medieval world. Chapter 6. Myths of Violence and Cruelty. Now, as your breathing becomes slower and deeper, let us turn to one of the most persistent myths about Vikings, the idea of them as exceptionally cruel and bloodthirsty warriors. This image is so rooted in our consciousness that we forget to ask a simple question. Were Vikings really more cruel than their contemporaries? Imagine the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793. This is a small island off the northeast coast of England where monks lead a peaceful life devoted to prayer and study of sacred texts. Suddenly, ships with dragon heads appear on the horizon. Vikings land on shore, plunder the monastery, kill some monks, take others into slavery. This event shocked the Christian world. Alcuin, one of the most educated men of his time, wrote about it as a harbinger of the end of the world. But let us put this event in historical context. What was happening in Europe at the same time? Just a few decades before the raid on Lindisfarne, Charlemagne conducted a campaign against the Saxons that lasted more than 30 years. During this campaign, thousands of people were killed. In 782, just 11 years before Lindisfarne, Charlemagne ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon prisoners in one day at Verdun. Imagine the scale of this massacre. 4,500 people killed by order of an emperor whom the church later proclaimed a saint. This was not a battle, not self-defense. This was cold-blooded mass murder of prisoners. But much less is written about this event than about the Viking raid on a small monastery. Why did Vikings get a reputation for special cruelty? The answer lies in who wrote history. Most written sources of that time were created in monasteries by Christian monks. For them, attacks by pagans on holy places were not just military actions, but attacks on the very foundation of their world. Imagine a monk experiencing a Viking raid. For him, this is not just robbery, this is desecration of a shrine and attack on God. He describes the event in apocalyptic terms, using the strongest words he knows. These descriptions are passed from generation to generation, shaping our perception of Vikings. But what if we look at Viking actions from their point of view? For a Scandinavian warrior, a monastery was not a holy place, but a rich, poorly defended warehouse of valuables. Monks were not sacred figures, but simply people who had accumulated wealth without knowing how to defend it. This does not justify violence, but helps understand motivation. Vikings did not attack monasteries out of hatred for Christianity. They attacked because there was gold, silver, precious books that could be sold. Moreover, many Viking raids were actually trading expeditions. Scandinavians sailed to the shores of England or France not for plunder, but for trade. If local residents met them peacefully, trade occurred. If hostilely, conflict began. Imagine a Scandinavian trader who sails to an English shore with a cargo of amber and furs. He hopes to exchange them for silver or fabrics. But local residents, frightened by stories of cruel Vikings, attack him. In response, he defends himself, and a peaceful trading expedition turns into a Viking raid. Even when Vikings really did conduct raids, their methods did not differ from the methods of other armies of that time. Medieval warfare was cruel by definition. All armies plundered conquered territories, all took prisoners for sale into slavery, all used intimidation as a military tactic. Frankish armies of Charlemagne, Anglo-Saxon troops, Byzantine legions, all were no less cruel than Vikings. The difference was that their actions were described by their own chroniclers, who presented them in a more favorable light. Vikings often preferred to avoid battles. Their strategy was based on speed and surprise. They attacked quickly, took loot and left, avoiding long sieges and bloody battles. This was rational tactics aimed at minimizing losses. Imagine a Viking leader planning a raid. He does not want to lose people in senseless battles. His goal is to get loot with minimal losses. Therefore, he chooses poorly defended targets, attacks unexpectedly, demands ransom instead of storming fortifications. Many cruel actions of Vikings were actually psychological warfare. They spread rumors about their ferocity so that opponents would surrender without a fight. This was more effective than real violence. When Vikings began to settle in conquered territories, their behavior changed radically. In Normandy, in England, in Ireland, they quickly integrated into local society, adopted Christianity, became defenders of the very lands they once plundered. Imagine the grandson of a Viking raider who became a Norman knight. He defends French lands from new raids, builds churches, patronizes monasteries. His grandfather was a cruel Viking, and he is a noble knight. But has anything changed in their nature, or have circumstances simply changed? Even famous Viking rituals, such as the blood eagle, are most likely literary exaggerations. No archaeological evidence of such practices has been found. These descriptions appear in sagas written centuries after the events, when reality had already mixed with myth. Vikings were people of their time. They lived in an era when violence was a common way of resolving conflicts, when war was one of the few ways of social advancement, when survival often depended on the ability to defend oneself by force. But they were also people who loved their families, cared for their children, created beautiful works of art, told stories, dreamed of a better life. Their cruelty was no greater than the cruelty of their contemporaries, but their humanity was no less. Understanding this helps us see Vikings not as mythical monsters, but as real people living in a complex and cruel time, doing what they considered necessary for the survival and prosperity of their communities. Chapter 7. The Legacy of the Vikings. As you sink into deep rest, let us reflect on what the Vikings truly left us. Their legacy extends far beyond images of warriors and raids, penetrating into the very foundations of our modern civilization in ways we often do not realize. Let us start with what is closest to us, the language we speak. Every day, pronouncing the most ordinary words, we use the legacy of the Vikings. Imagine a simple sentence. They are angry fellows who want to take the knife and cut the bread. Almost every word in this sentence came to us from Old Norse. The words they, are, angry, want, take, knife, cut, all have Scandinavian roots. This is not coincidence and not the result of conquest. This is the result of centuries of peaceful coexistence and cultural mixing in medieval England. Imagine an English village of the 11th century where descendants of Anglo-Saxons and descendants of Danish settlers live side by side. Children play together, families trade with each other, young people marry without regard to origin. In this daily communication, languages mix, creating a new, richer language. Scandinavian words did not just add to the English language, they changed its structure. The pronouns they, them, their completely replaced Anglo-Saxon equivalents. This shows how deep the influence of Scandinavian culture was. But the legacy of the Vikings extends far beyond linguistics. They literally changed the economic map of Europe. Imagine 8th century Europe, a continent where trade was limited, where most people lived in isolation, where connections between regions were weak. Vikings created the first truly global trade network. Their ships connected Greenland with Constantinople, Iceland with Baghdad. They brought to Europe not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, cultural practices from the most remote corners of the known world. Silver that Vikings brought from the Arab world revolutionized the European economy. Before their trading expeditions, Europe had an acute shortage of precious metals. Trade was conducted mainly by barter. Vikings brought silver, which became the foundation of a new monetary system. Imagine a European king who for the first time gets the opportunity to mint silver coins thanks to metal brought by Vikings. This gives him new opportunities for trade, for hiring armies, for construction. The economy becomes more complex and efficient. Vikings were also pioneers in navigation and shipbuilding. Their longships were technological marvels of their time. Light, fast, capable of sailing both at sea and on rivers, they opened new possibilities for travel and trade. Viking shipbuilding technologies influenced the development of navigation throughout Europe. Their navigation methods, their understanding of sea currents and winds, their ability to make long ocean voyages, all this became part of the common European maritime heritage. Cities founded by Vikings became important centers of medieval Europe. Dublin, founded as a Viking trading post, became the capital of Ireland. York became one of the largest cities of medieval England. Kiev and Novgorod became centers of Russian statehood. Imagine 9th century Dublin, a small Viking settlement on the banks of the River Liffey. Traders from Scandinavia meet here with Irish merchants, exchange goods, ideas, cultural practices. Gradually, the settlement grows, becomes a city, then a capital. The political legacy of Vikings is also significant. They brought to Europe new forms of governance, new legal concepts. The Icelandic Althing, founded in 930, is considered one of the oldest parliaments in the world. This was an assembly of free men who made laws and resolved disputes. The concept of the Thing, a popular assembly, spread throughout Scandinavia and influenced the development of democratic institutions in other parts of Europe. The idea that free people have the right to participate in making decisions affecting their lives became an important part of European political tradition. Vikings were also explorers who expanded the boundaries of the known world. They reached North America 500 years before Columbus. Their settlements in Greenland lasted almost 500 years. They explored Arctic seas, discovered new lands, laid new routes. Imagine Leif Erikson standing on the shore of Vinland, North America. He does not know he has discovered a new continent. For him, this is just new land where a settlement can be founded, where there are forests for building ships, where one can live and prosper. The cultural legacy of Vikings is manifested in art, literature, mythology. Scandinavian sagas became an important part of world literature. Their mythology influenced the work of countless writers, artists, composers. Viking ornaments, their jewelry art, their wood and stone carving influenced the development of European decorative art. Their aesthetics, based on complex interlacing patterns, became part of the common European artistic tradition. Even their approach to death and burial left a mark on European culture. The idea that a warrior should die with honor, that death in battle leads to Valhalla, influenced the chivalric ideals of the Middle Ages. But perhaps the most important legacy of Vikings is their spirit of enterprise, their readiness to explore the unknown, their ability to adapt to new conditions. They showed that small communities can have enormous influence on the course of history if they are ready for risk and innovation. Imagine a Scandinavian farmer who decides to leave his village and set off into the unknown. He does not know what he will find beyond the horizon, but he is ready to risk for the possibility of a better life. The spirit of adventure and enterprise became an important part of European character. Vikings taught Europe to think globally. They showed that the world is bigger than it seems, that beyond the sea there are new lands, new opportunities, new challenges. They expanded the horizons of European consciousness, preparing the ground for the age of great geographical discoveries. Their legacy lives not in images of warriors with axes, but in every word we speak, in every city they founded, in every idea about freedom and democracy they helped develop. This is a legacy of peace, trade, exploration, and cultural exchange, much more valuable than any myths of conquest. Conclusion: return to truth. Now, as our journey through time comes to an end, and you prepare to sink into deep, restorative sleep, let us pause for a moment and look back at the path we have traveled together. We began this journey with images of horned helmets and bloodthirsty warriors, and we end with an understanding of a complex, rich, human civilization. Imagine fog slowly dispersing over Scandinavian fjords at dawn. Just as slowly, myths and misconceptions disperse, revealing to us the true picture of the past. Vikings appear before us not as mythical creatures, but as real people with their hopes, fears, dreams, and daily concerns. We learned that horned helmets were the invention of a 19th century theatrical costume designer, that real Vikings wore simple, practical armor created for protection, not for effect. We understood that behind the image of a fierce warrior was an ordinary person who spent most of his time in peaceful labor. We saw the real daily life of Scandinavian families: hard work on farms, struggle for survival in harsh climate, high child mortality, constant threat of hunger and disease. This was a life full of challenges, but also full of meaning, where every day mattered, where every person played an important role in community survival. We debunked the myth of a united warrior nation, understanding that Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes were different peoples with different cultures, united only by common Scandinavian heritage. Their differences were as important as similarities, shaping unique paths of development for each region. We explored the role of women in Scandinavian society, understanding that real Viking women were not warriors from legends, but keepers of the hearth, craftswomen, mothers whose contribution to community survival and prosperity was invaluable. Their strength was manifested not in battle, but in daily struggle for life. We discovered the economic reality of the Viking Age, understanding that trade was much more important than raids, that Scandinavian merchants created one of the most extensive trade networks in history, connecting the most remote corners of the known world. We debunked myths about the exceptional cruelty of Vikings, understanding that they were no more cruel than their contemporaries, that their reputation was largely created by Christian chroniclers for whom pagan attacks on holy places were especially traumatic. And finally, we explored the rich legacy of Vikings, understanding that their true contribution to history lies not in conquest, but in trade, exploration, cultural exchange, language development, language development, political and art. This story teaches us the importance of critical thinking, the need to verify our ideas about the past using archaeological data and historical sources. It shows how easily romantic myths can replace historical truth, how important it is to separate facts from fiction. But this story also shows us the beauty and complexity of human experience. Real Vikings were much more interesting than their mythical counterparts. They were people who loved and suffered, dreamed and struggled, created and destroyed, just as we do today. Imagine a Scandinavian farmer 1,000 years ago, standing in his field at sunset. He looks at his harvest, thinks about his family, plans tomorrow. His concerns are not so different from our concerns. His hopes and fears are familiar to us. He is human, like us. This connection through time, this understanding of common humanity, this is what is truly valuable in studying history. Not heroic myths, not romantic legends, but simple recognition that people of the past were the same people as us with all their virtues and flaws. As you prepare for sleep, let this thought bring you peace. History is not about distant, unattainable heroes. It is about us, about our common human journey through time. Each generation faces its challenges, finds its solutions, leaves its legacy. Vikings showed us that small communities can have enormous influence on the course of history. They showed the importance of enterprise, readiness to explore the unknown, ability to adapt to new conditions. They showed that trade and cultural exchange can be more powerful forces than war and conquest. Their story reminds us that human progress happens not through conflicts, but through cooperation, not through isolation, but through connections, not through destruction, but through creation. This is a lesson that remains relevant today. Let images of peaceful Scandinavian villages, hardworking farmers, enterprising traders, skilled craftsmen accompany you to sleep. Let understanding of the complexity and richness of human experience bring you peace. Let knowledge that truth is often more beautiful than myth give you confidence in tomorrow. Good night. May your dreams be full of wisdom from the past and hope for the future. May the story of Vikings, freed from myths and prejudices, remind you of the beauty and dignity of ordinary human life, of the importance of truth and understanding in our complex world. Close your eyes and allow yourself to sink into deep, restorative sleep, carrying with you a new understanding of the past and a clearer vision of what it means to be human in any era of history.